The Law of Dependent Arising. The Secret to Bondage and Release. Sermon 10. By Bhikkhu K. Ñāṇananda. Narrated by Bhikkhu Candana. Sermon 10. Pahankanua Sermon number 192. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage be to the Fortunate One, the Worthy, fully enlightened. Lobhajang dosajang cheva, mohajang chapaviddasu, yang tena pakatang kammang, appang va yadi va bahung, iddehe va tang vedaniyang, vathu anyang na vidyati. Tasma lobhancha dosancha mohajang chapi viddasu. Vijjang uppadayang bhikkhu sabbadānaṃ jahe. Devaduta vagga. In the case of an ignorant one, whatever deed born of greed, hate, or delusion done by him, be it little or much, has to be experienced here itself. There is no other site for it. Therefore, let the wise monk, arousing knowledge, give up deeds born of greed, hate, and delusion, and all bad borns. Dear listeners, Poson Poya Day is, for the Buddhists of this country, Sri Lanka, a day which arouses a great enthusiasm in the Dhamma. Due to the establishment of Buddha's dispensation in this country by the mission of the Arahant Venerable Mahinda Thera and his group of monks, King Devanampiatissa and the inhabitants were able to build up a vision of life in accordance with the right view. They formed a correct vision of values regarding good and bad, skillful and unskillful, and merit and demerit. By taking up 2 verses pertaining to that philosophy of life as the topic of our 10th sermon on dependent arising, we hope to present this sermon as a Poson sermon, befitting the occasion. These 2 verses are found in the Devaduta Vagga of the Anguttara Nikāya. Even from the first paragraph of that discourse, the relation between kamma and the law of dependent arising is made clear. This is how the Buddha begins the discourse. Monks, there are these 3 causes for the arising of deeds. What are the 3? Greed is a cause for the arising of deeds. Hate is a cause for the arising of deeds. Delusion is a cause for the arising of deeds. Then the Buddha says, Monks, whatever deed that is done with greed, born of greed, caused by greed, arising from greed, whatever his selfhood is born, there that deed ripens. Where that deed ripens, there he experiences the result of that deed, either in this very life, or in the next birth, or in any subsequent birth. A similar pronouncement is made in regard to deeds born of hate and delusion. Then a certain simile is given as an illustration. Just as monks, when seeds unbroken, not putrid, not affected by wind and sun, and capable of sprouting and well stored up, are sown on a good field, well prepared. If the rain also comes down in plenty, then those seeds, monks, will come to growth and plenitude. Even so, monks, whatever deed that is done with greed, with hate, with delusion, wherever his selfhood is born, there that deed ripens. Where that deed ripens, there he experiences the result of that deed, either in this very life, or in the next birth, or in any subsequent birth. We can see that this simile about seeds has some relation between cause and effect. Then, about skillful deeds, the following pronouncement is made. Monks, there are 3 causes for the arising of deeds. What are the 3? Non-greed is a cause for the arising of deeds. Non-hate is a cause for the arising of deeds. Non-delusion is a cause for the arising of deeds. Monks, whatever deed that is done with non-greed, born of non-greed, caused by non-greed, arisen from non-greed, when greed is gone, thus is that deed abandoned. Uprooted, made like a palm tree, divested of its sight, made non-existent, incapable of arising in the future. The same is said about deeds born of non-hate and non-delusion, and then a simile is given as an illustration. It is as if, monks, in the case of seeds unbroken, non-putrid, non-affected by wind and sun, capable of sprouting and well stored up, a man were to burn in a fire, and having burnt it in a fire, reduce them to ashes, and having reduced them to ashes, blow off in a strong wind, or get it swept away in a swift flowing current of a river, and thereby, monks, would those seeds be abandoned, uprooted, made like a palm tree, divested of its sight, made non-existent and incapable of arising in the future? Even so, monks, whatever deed that is done with non-greed, with non-hate, with non-delusion, when greed is gone, when hate is gone, when delusion is gone, thus is that deed be abandoned, uprooted, made like a palm tree, divested of its sight, made non-existent and incapable of arising in the future. The meaning of this peculiar simile is that deeds done with non-greed are exhausted with the ending of greed. Why is that? Because the net result of deeds done with non-greed is the ending of greed itself. Similarly, deeds done with non-hatred get exhausted with the complete ending of hatred. So also deeds done with non-delusion get exhausted with the complete ending of delusion. What we have here is the norm of rise and fall. Though it seems simple enough, there is something deep involved here. Deeds done with greed, hate, and delusion germinate like seeds on getting rain. In fact, craving in some contexts is compared to rain. As a synonym for craving, sineha signifies moisture. Beings in samsara go on with greed, hate, and delusion, given the rain or moisture of craving. Then the results of those deeds have to be experienced, either in this very life, or in the next birth, or else in subsequent births. But the roots of skillful deeds, namely non-greed, non-hate, and non-delusion, behave differently. For instance, deeds done with non-greed get exhausted with the ending of greed. They are abandoned, uprooted, and destroyed. It is as if someone, instead of sowing seeds which could germinate, were to burn them, reduce them to ashes, and blow off against the wind or throw into a swift flowing river. When the Buddha gives a simile, it is thorough and conclusive. Here we have something deep. This samsara goes on due to greed, hatred, and delusion. What we call skillful deeds, namely those born of non-greed, non-hate, and non-delusion, are those that we make use of for putting an end to samsara. In the last analysis, they conduce to our deliverance from samsara. There too we have something like the norm of arising and ceasing. Now let us take up the moral law of deeds, kamma. Here we propose to discuss kamma from the point of view of the law of dependent arising. Nibbāna Sutta of the Anguttara Nikāya is a discourse revealing some highly significant aspects of the moral law of kamma. There the Buddha gives a sixfold analysis of kamma, deeds. Monks, kamma should be understood. The source and origin of kamma should be understood. The diversity of kamma should be understood. The result of kamma should be understood. The cessation of kamma should be understood. The way of practice leading to the cessation of kamma should be understood. Having presented these 6 topics, the Buddha himself analyzes them one by one. The analysis given to the first topic, kamma should be known, is one that you all are familiar with. Cetanahang bhikkhave kammang vadami, cetayitva kammang karoti kayena vācāya manasa. Monks, intention, I say, is kamma. Having intended, one does kamma by body, by word, by mind. This definition of kamma, in terms of intention, has quite a deep dimension in meaning. We can connect it with the analysis of dependent arising we have presented earlier. For the benefit of newcomers in this crowd, let us mention it in brief. While analyzing name and form, we brought up a certain simile. We compared the constituents of name to the 5 fingers of our hand. Feeling is the little finger, small but mischievous. Perception is the ring finger, both popular and notorious. Intention is the middle finger, prominent and intrusive. Contact is the forefinger, fussy and busy all the time. Attention is the thumb, standing apart but approachable to the rest. It is with these 5 members of the name group that we get hold of what constitutes form. Here too it is the prominent and intrusive intention that the Buddha has called kamma. Of course, it must be confessed that the simile of the 5 fingers is not found in the discourses. Whatever it is, our comparison of intention to the prominent and intrusive middle finger seems quite apt. As a matter of fact, it is at the stage of intention that the notion of self becomes prominent and intrusive, and has to pay for that intrusion. Then the second point the Buddha has stated is the source and origin of kamma. According to the Buddha, the source and origin of kamma is contact. Just see, there again our simile is meaningful. We compared contact to the forefinger, fussy and busy all the time. It is the most proximate cause for the origin of kamma, because next to it is attention, the thumb. It is attention that is instrumental in a change of focus from one thing to another. Those of you who have listened to our earlier sermons might remember our Narcissus simile. Narcissus was tempted to embrace his own reflection in water at the stage of intention. Then came contact and attention. Whatever it is, the Buddha has stated that contact is the source and origin of kamma. Then comes the third point, the diversity, vemattata, of kamma. This is explained as follows. There is, monks, that kamma which has to be experienced in hell. There is that Kamma which has to be experienced in the animal realm. There is that Kamma which has to be experienced in the realm of ghostly beings. There is that Kamma which has to be experienced in the human world. There is that Kamma which has to be experienced in the Deva world. The diversity shown is according to the place where Kamma has to be experienced. Then the result of Kamma is said to be threefold. Monks, I say that the result of Kamma is of three types: in this very life, in the next birth, or in a subsequent birth. The fifth point, the cessation of Kamma, is explained briefly. Monks, the cessation of contact is the cessation of Kamma. This is understandable. Since the origin of Kamma is contact, its cessation has to be with the cessation of contact itself. Lastly comes the way of practice leading to the cessation of Kamma. It is said to be the Noble Eightfold Path. In this way, there is a sixfold analysis given in that context. There are many other discourses on Kamma, some of which we'll bring up as we go on. Now, according to the doctrine of the Nigantas, there are three types of Kamma, namely bodily Kamma, verbal Kamma, and mental Kamma, out of which they give first place to bodily Kamma. But according to the Buddha, mental Kamma takes precedence. It is clearly stated in the Upāli Sutta of the Majjhima Nikāya, where the Buddha tells Diga Tapassi, the disciple of Nigantanataputta, that mental Kamma is more serious. One can understand the reason for it even from the first verse of the Dhammapada. Manopubangama Dhamma mano seta manomaya manasa che paduttena bhasati va karoti va tato nang dukkhaman veti chakkang va vahato padang. Mind is the forerunner of mind objects. Mind is their chief. They are mind-made. If, with a mind corrupt with hate, one speaks or does an act, then suffering trails him close behind, like the wheel, the ox that draws the cart. The primacy of the mind is emphasized in the Dhamma, whereas the Nigantas give first place to the body. Because of this primacy of the mind, if one speaks or acts with a corrupt mind, one has to suffer the consequences. Morally culpable deeds are by definition intentioned. It is because the Nigantas did not recognize the relevance of intention that they went to the extreme of self-mortification. The reason for the Buddha's middle path is the identification of Kamma with intention. Another important discourse portraying the results of Kamma is the Devaduta Sutta of the Majjhima Nikāya. As you may have heard, it is a discourse preached as a sermon by the Venerable Arahant Mahinda in Anuradhapura to acquaint the people of this island with the dreadful consequences of evil deeds. In that discourse, the Buddha first of all analyzes the way in which beings are born in various realms, according to their good and bad conduct. There he mentions heavenly realm, human world, the realm of ghostly beings, the animal realm, and lastly, hell. However, it is about the hell that the Buddha describes in particular in this discourse. The Buddha gives a vivid description of the terrible suffering undergone by beings in various hells. That is probably why the Venerable Mahinda preached this discourse to the people of this country. The sutta instills moral dread of this sansaric existence. On a Poson full moon Poya day like this, we should call to mind such instructive teachings of the Buddha. Generally, such discourses like Chula Hattipadopama Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, which also was preached to the people of this country by Venerable Arahant Mahinda, have an appeal to the intellect. But we should consider why he thought of preaching a discourse like Devaduta Sutta. He probably wished to wean the people's minds from evil and turn them towards the good and skillful, according to the word of the Buddha. Another important discourse worth mentioning in this context is the Chula Kamma Vibhanga Sutta, preached by the Buddha to the Brahmin youth, Subha. There, the preeminence of Kamma and its pervasive influence on the lives of beings in samsara is brought out. Subha, the Brahmin youth, asks the Buddha why there is a diversity among human beings. He says, "Some human beings are short-lived, some are long-lived, some have many ailments, some have few ailments, some are ugly, some are comely, some are inferior, some are superior, some are poor, some are rich, some are low-born, some are high-born, some are unwise, some are wise." He asks the Buddha the reason for this disparity. Then the Buddha comes out with the famous dictum on Kamma. Kammasaka manava satta kamma dayada kamma yoni kamma bandhu kamma patisarana kammang satte vibhajati yadidang hina panitataya. Young man, beings are owners of their kamma. They have kamma as their inheritance. Kamma is their origin. Kamma is their relative. They have kamma as their resort. Kamma differentiates beings as inferior or superior. Kammasaka, what one can call one's own, is kamma. Kamma dayada, what one inherits, is one's own kamma. Kamma yoni, the place of one's birth, is also decided by kamma. Kamma bandhu, kamma is one's true relative. Kamma patisarana, kamma is one's resort in samsara. Kamma is also responsible for the distinction as high or low among beings. Therefore, the Buddha has recommended the constant reflection of this pervasive influence of kamma as a means to refrain from misconduct in the Thana Sutta as follows. Kammasakum hi kamma dayado kamma yoni kamma bandhu kamma patisarano yang kammang karissami kalyanang va papakang va tassa dayado bhavissami. I am the owner of my kamma. I am the inheritor of my kamma. Kamma is my matrix. Kamma is my relative. Kamma is my resort. Whatever kamma I do, whether good or bad, I will be its inheritor. Although it is stated like that, there is in this Dhamma a way of freedom from kamma. On the other hand, Nigantas or Jains had an extreme view of kamma. They held that everything is due to past kamma, sabbang pubbe katahetu, and put down all pleasures and pains one experiences now to things done in the past. Therefore, they advocated self-mortification as a means of paying off past kamma, a way of practice called nijjara, wearing out. They also observed rigorous vows and ascetic practices in order to prevent accumulation of new kamma. The Buddha sometimes interrogated the Nigantas and refuted their views. He asked whether they can keep an account of kamma so far paid off and to be paid off, thereby proving that the wanton infliction of bodily pain on oneself is meaningless. In fact, there were other extreme views on kamma in the contemporary society. They were sometimes put forward within the framework of a tetralemma or four-cornered logic. Some, like the Nigantas, held the view that all pleasure and pain one experiences is of one's own making. Sayankatang sukha-dukkhang. Some others said it is done by others. Parankatang sukha-dukkhang. Yet others combined these two views and said that it is done by both oneself and others. Sayang katancha parang katancha sukha-dukkhang. Still others rejected both self-agency and external agency and asserted that pleasure and pain one experiences is of fortuitous origin. Paṭicca Samuppāda sukha-dukkhang. The Buddha rejected all four types of view and introduced the correct way by declaring that kamma is dependently arisen, paticca samuppannang. As he sometimes put it, king paticca, pasang paticca. Dependent on what? Dependent on contact. So, the correct position is this. It is not a case of self-agency, nor of external agency, nor both, nor neither, but due to contact, pasang paticca. The term paticca represents paticca samuppada and negates the idea of fortuitous origin fairly and squarely. That is why the Buddha concludes, monks, the cessation of contact is the cessation of kamma. Now we are going deeper and deeper. But in the traditional analysis of Paṭicca Samuppāda, an unfortunate trend is seen, though it cannot be compared to the Niganto view. As you know, there are 12 links in the Paṭicca Samuppāda formula. In the Visuddhimagga and other later works, these 12 links are divided into 3 periods of time in the analysis of Paṭicca Samuppāda. Ignorance and preparations, sankharas, are said to belong to the past. The 8 links, consciousness, name and form, 6 sense spheres, contact, feeling, craving, grasping, and becoming, are included in the present. Birth and decay and death are referred to the future. The attempt is to prove that consciousness has arisen from a past cause. We have already shown that this explanation is untenable. The most important point in the formula is the vortex between consciousness and name and form. Even from the Buddha's analysis of the law of dependent arising in the Samyutta Nikāya, the term sankhara is defined in a way quite different from later definitions of the same term. Later analysis interpreted sankhara as equivalent to kamma. But that is not the way the Buddha explained sankhara in that context. He says, Katamecha bhikkhave sankhara, tayo me bhikkhave sankhara, kaya sankharo, vachi sankharo, chitta sankharo, ime vuccanti bhikkhave sankhara. And what, monks, are preparations? Monks, there are these 3 preparations: body preparation, speech preparation, thought preparation. These, monks, are called preparations. It is noteworthy that in this definition, the term sankhara is used in the singular as kaya sankharo, body preparation, vachi sankharo, speech preparation, and chitta sankharo, thought preparation. These 3 are defined in the Dhamma as follows: body preparation in breath and out-breath, speech preparation, thinking and pondering, thought preparation, perception and feeling. So then, in the Vibhanga Sutta, where the Buddha defines each of the 12 links, the term sankhara is defined as threefold. In-breathing and out-breathing cannot be taken as kamma that prepares another birth. Likewise, thinking and pondering generally rendered as initial and sustained thought, as well as perception and feeling, are not reckoned as kamma. In fact, whoever is wishing to put an end to existence, bhava, has to appease them. That is why they are called preparations. Another instance of misinterpretation is the definition of consciousness. In the Visuddhimagga and other later treatises, consciousness is defined as relinking consciousness, patisandhi vijnana, resulting from so-called sankharas, interpreted as past kamma. In other words, it is supposed to be the outcome of past ignorance and preparations. Such an interpretation is unwarranted, since the Buddha himself has defined consciousness as being sixfold in that particular context, in the Vibhanga Sutta. Katamancha bhikkhave vijnānaṃ, chaime bhikkhave vijnānakāya, chakku vijnānaṃ, sota vijnānaṃ, ghana vijnānaṃ, jivha vijnānaṃ, kaya vijnānaṃ, mano vijnānaṃ. Idang vucchati bhikkhave vijnānaṃ. And what, monks, is consciousness? Monks, there are these 6 groups, literally, bodies of consciousness: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. These, monks, are called consciousness. Since sankhara and vijnana are defined as above by the Buddha, by no means can they be referred to the past. We have pointed out that all the 12 links pertain to the present. Of course, one may ask, well then, where do ignorance and preparations come in? That we have already explained. The very non-understanding of the mutual interrelation between consciousness and name and form is itself ignorance. The activity sustained by that ignorance is preparations. To go back to our parable of Narcissus, that Greek youth Narcissus, who imagined an angel in the reflection of his own face in the water, was tempted to embrace it again and again by that ignorance, that murk of delusion. So also are the worldlings. What we have in ignorance and preparations is the background or setting. The crucial point, however, is the vortex between consciousness and name and form, that vortical interplay or mutual interrelation. That is something pertaining to the present. That precisely is why it is possible to put an end to suffering here and now by experiencing the cessation of becoming or existence. We mentioned all this in particular because there is some confusion in explaining kamma in the context of Paṭicca Samuppāda by attributing it to something in the past. However, one can still raise a question regarding the significance of what are called punyabhisankhara, apunyabhisankhara, and anicca-bhisankhara, and their relevance to sankhara. In that context, what is called abhisankhara are special preparations, that is to say, specially performed kamma. In the former context, sankhara refer to such activities as inbreathing and outbreathing, which are like the bedrock of sankharas. But here, what is called abhisankhara are volitional preparations where intention comes in. Punyabhisankhara are meritorious special preparations. Apunyabhisankhara are demeritorious special preparations, and anicca-bhisankhara are imperturbable special preparations, which have to do with the meditative absorptions, which bring about rebirth in Brahma worlds. Of course, these 3 forms of preparations are also the outcome of ignorance. But by dispelling that ignorance in this very life, those forces of preparations are stilled. These special preparations are kept up by egotism. All in all, kamma is dependently arisen. Our aim should be the cessation of kamma. The path of practice leading to the cessation of kamma is the Noble Eightfold Path. As you know, the right view in the Noble Eightfold Path is the Four Noble Truths of suffering, its arising, cessation, and the path to that cessation. But there is another right view called Kammasakata Sammaditthi, the right view that has kamma as one's own. It is the right view which has 10 points, dasa vattuka, namely, gifts, donations, and offerings are not worthless. There is fruit and result of wholesome and unwholesome actions. There is this world and there is the next world. There is mother, there is father. There are in this world recluses and Brahmins of right practice, who have by themselves understood and realized both this world and the next, and are able to explain them. This right view of 10 points is called Kammasakata Sammaditthi, because, in the context of samsara, this is the view which helps beings to avoid rebirth in bad borns and win rebirth in heavenly realms. That view which asserts just the opposite of these 10 points is called a pervert view. You all can guess what it is like. It says, for instance, gifts, donations, and offerings are worthless. There is no fruit or result in wholesome and unwholesome actions. There is no this world, no next world, and so on. The term kammasakata has a deep meaning. It means taking kamma as one's own. This is where the prominent and intrusive middle finger, i.e., intention, has to pay with responsibility for his prominence and intrusion. To hark back to our simile of the 5 fingers. Due to that prominence and intrusion, one may do merit or demerit or attain jhanic states. From a supramundane point of view, even the high jhanic attainments of Alara Kalama and Uddakaramaputta are of no account. That is why the Buddha left them with dejection. Deliverance from samsara is not to be found in punya, apunya, and aninja bhisankhara, meritorious, demeritorious, and imperturbable special preparations. However, they have their relevance in samsara. One should give up what is demeritorious and develop the meritorious, and above all, the imperturbable. They are useful for the development of the mind, but for deliverance from samsara, there is only the Noble Eightfold Path, that is to say, supramundane Noble Eightfold Path. You mustn't confuse the two views. Some intellectuals dismiss the Kammasakata Sammaditthi as irrelevant, and say that there is no this world, no next world, no mother, no father, and so on, calling it sunyata, or voidness. That is going to an extreme. The Buddha calls it a pervert view. Worldlings, if they blunder, end up in hell. If one trains in the view that is based on the recognition of one's responsibility for one's deeds, one could at least get rebirth in heavens, because one knows the results of good and evil and trains accordingly. But, in the last analysis, all these are preparations. Therefore, the final aim should be the release from preparations. As we pointed out, our aspiration should be the cessation of becoming, bhava nirodha. In the journey towards that cessation of becoming, the Buddha had to take a middle path. The right view which takes kamma as one's own, kammasakata sammaditthi, has its place in that middle path. He did not go to an extreme to approve a pervert view like annihilationists, who even went to the extreme of self-indulgence. As the Buddha proclaims in the Devaduta Sutta, he could see beings getting reborn in heavens and hells according to their kamma, as if someone standing between two houses would see human beings entering and leaving those houses. So, if that is the position, it cannot be contradicted. That is the situation in the world. It is due to that condition in the world that the Buddha recognized the relevance of a right view that takes kamma as one's own. We should now pay attention to this aspect too, because some have confused issues. Of course, from a deeper perspective, what is helpful in attaining deliverance is the Noble Eightfold Path. It is based on the view that this is an entire mass of suffering. There is no question of oneself or another. But in truth, that vision arises only at the moment of the supramundane path. Although it comes in to some extent even before it, only at the moment of the supramundane path moment, it rightly surfaces. We brought up these deeper aspects to show that the analysis of the 12 links according to the 3 periods of time is incorrect, and that kamma is conditionally arisen. Paṭicca Samuppāda, since kamma is conditionally arisen, release from Paṭicca Samuppāda is tantamount to release from samsara. Kamma is dependently arisen, due to not seeing the law of dependent arising. Therefore, to see it is to be free from it. In other words, the wrong course of action is the result of not seeing the interdependence between consciousness and name and form. Comprehension of it dispels the darkness of ignorance. In short, in the light of wisdom, the vanity of that course of action is realized. This, then, is the supramundane freedom, the deliverance from samsara. As far as this middle path is concerned, it is obvious that the Buddha avoided both extremes, namely that of the Nigantas and that of the annihilationists. The middle path shown by the Buddha is extraordinary, in that it implies the twofold right view to enable beings in samsara to avoid bad borns and get rebirth in heavens, and gradually to leave behind both hell and heaven, and attain final deliverance from samsara. On one side there is the right view that takes kamma as one's own, and on the other there are the 4 noble truths that lead one out of samsara. There are a number of discourses in which the Buddha has preached about kamma. There is, for instance, a very important sutta which shows the connection between kamma and views, with an instructive simile. He declares that in the case of a person with a wrong view, whatever bodily, verbal, or mental kamma he performs follows the pattern of the wrong view he has taken up and accepted. And whatever intention, aspiration, determination, and preparations he has, ya cha cetana ya cha patthana yo cha panidhi ye cha sankhara, all those things will conduce to unwelcome, unpleasant, disagreeable, unwholesome, and painful consequences, because the view is evil. Then the Buddha gives a simile for it that you can easily understand. When a margosa seed or a kosataki seed or a bitter pumpkin seed is planted on wet ground, whatever essence of earth or essence of water it absorbs, all that will conduce to bitterness, gives a bitter fruit. Similarly, in the case of one who has taken up a wrong view, whatever bodily, verbal, or mental kamma he has, all that produces a bitter and unpleasant result. On the other hand, in the case of a person who has right view, all his bodily, verbal, and mental kamma, all intentions, aspirations, and determinations he has, all that gives a sweet fruit and brings happiness. The simile given in that case is, just as a sugarcane seedling, a sweet paddy seed, or a grape seed, when planted on wet ground, whatever essence of earth or essence of water it absorbs, all that gives a sweet fruit. This shows the importance of the correctness of views. That is why we should always try to avoid wrong views and going to extremes. From the worldly point of view, that right view which takes kamma as one's own is helpful in the context of samsara. But when one is thinking of transcending the world, what is helpful is the Noble Eightfold Path. Then there is no reference to persons, no talk of oneself or another, just a whole mass of suffering. What is called the five aggregates of grasping is a mass of suffering. The cause of it is craving. The aim is the cessation of craving. The path to it is the Noble Eightfold Path. One should not mix up the two types of right view. The Buddha has pointed out both because they pertain to the middle path. That is, as far as views are concerned. There are many deep discourses on this subject, which are not easily understood. On one occasion, the Buddha, addressing the monks, said, "Monks, I shall preach to you the new and old kamma." What, monks, is old kamma? The I, monks, is old kamma, specially prepared, abhisankātaṃ, and specially intentioned, abhisancetayitāṃ, which should be known as something to be experienced. Vedaniyang dattabhaṃ. So also are the other senses, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. That means the senses are the product of our own kamma. Then what is called new kamma is what one performs now by body, speech, and mind. So it is a fact that this being with his senses is produced by kamma. But one has to get free even from these senses that are the product of kamma, sometime or other. It is that freedom that on several occasions we pointed out as something realizable here and now. In the end, when describing the attainment of the fruit of arahanthood, it is said that the eye ceases and the perception of forms fade away. The ear ceases and the perception of sounds fade away, and so on. Even the six senses which are produced by the force of our intentions and kamma generated in samsara can be made to cease in this very world. It is an experience of cessation realizable here and now. That is what has been called the cessation of the six sense spheres, salayatana nirodha. By seeing it as a fact of experience, the arahants realize a state of freedom from all the six senses that are made up or prepared by kamma. Through it, one can understand what is called the release from the prepared, sankhata, which in other words is asankhata, the unprepared. The Buddha has pointed out that beings have kamma as their own, kammasaka, because of the responsibility for one's actions, which is the result of ignorance and craving. One has to suffer the consequences. That is a norm common even to Buddhas and Arahants. As you all know, even Venerable Mahamoggallana had to undergo the result of a bad kamma he had committed in the distant past by killing his parents. This body is the product of our kamma. As a way of saying, we call it the work of Mara. It is as if Mara has given us this body with a curse. You suffer. That is why, in explaining what old kamma is, the Buddha said, Chakkung bhikkave puranang kammang abhisankhatang abhisanchetayitang vedaniyang dattabbang. The eye, monks, is old kamma, specially prepared and specially intentioned, which should be known as something to be experienced. The eye, for instance, is something given to us to suffer. Though we take pride in our eye, that is what the Buddha is telling us. Just think of one who has no eyes, a blind man deprived of vision. Or take the case of a person with only one eye. See how much they suffer. So also are the other senses. These are the results of our kamma. But we have to transcend them. It is for that purpose that we need the noble Eightfold Path. Then there are the three kinds of preparations. Sankhara, body preparation. Kaya sankharo, speech preparation. Vachi sankharo, and thought preparation. Chitta sankharo. Why are in-breathing and out-breathing regarded as a body preparation? It is because they prepare the body. No one can be blamed for breathing in and breathing out. However, ignorance and craving are hidden beneath them. That is why every Buddha is said to have attained Buddhahood through mindfulness of breathing. There is something wonderful about it. Worldlings even entertain absurd views of self by taking it as prana, the principle of life. But the Buddha pointed out that this process of in-breathing and out-breathing, which is an illustration of arising and ceasing, is itself a suffering. Worldlings are ignorant of it. They are sometimes not even aware that they are breathing. They take it for granted. Only the outward activities, which we called abhisankara, special preparations, they take seriously. That is what appears prominently, like that fraction of the iceberg visible above the surface. Like the vast portion submerged is the above-mentioned body preparation, kaya sankharo. In-breathing and out-breathing are kaya sankharo in the sense that they prepare the body for activity. Similarly, thinking and pondering are vachi sankharo, speech preparation. There is far more thinking and pondering going on within a person than what comes out in speech. In fact, vitakka vichara can be regarded as subvocal speech. It is after a good deal of thinking and pondering that one breaks into speech. That again is like the submerged portion of an iceberg. That is a preparation for speech. Then there are the perceptions and the feelings, which prepare our thoughts and intentions. In the final reckoning, they also have to be conquered. They have to be appeased or stilled. As you may have heard, when one is developing meditative absorptions, one has to calm down thinking and pondering at some stage. Then he finds even breathing troublesome and calms that too. And finally, he has to calm down perceptions and feelings. That is what the Buddha revealed to the world by the attainment of the cessation of perceptions and feelings. Until then, the worldlings found their progress blocked by perceptions and were unable to make a breakthrough. That was due to egoism, the notion of I and mine. The Buddha showed the way to deliverance through the cessation of perceptions and feelings. It seems, therefore, that there is a subtle level of preparations which escape our attention. It is incorrect to limit the meaning of sankhara to kamma as such. The term sankhara has quite a broad meaning. There are many who interpret the term to mean only kamma. But there is a subtle nuance of the term which goes deeper than the implications of kamma, that is, bhava sankhara, the preparations pertaining to existence. They tend to perpetuate existence. In the last analysis, even perceptions and feeling are preparations which have to be calmed down. All these the Buddha understood as preparations. Within the dictum, sabbe sankhara anicca, all preparations are impermanent, which we take lightly, the entire Dhamma is included. All these are a heap of preparations. Not only the kamma that is outwardly visible, even the underlying layers of inbreathing and outbreathing, thinking and pondering, perceptions and feelings have to be calmed down to attain that state of distilling of all preparations, sabba sankhara samatha. On the one hand, the Buddha has pointed out two beings in samsara, the way of molding their courses of action without involvement in wrong views, so as to avoid rebirth in bad borns and, with right view, to get reborn in heavenly realms. On the other hand, he has also pointed out the noble Eightfold Path for transcending both good and evil and winning freedom from the entire heap of preparations. In the latter case, it is not a question of persons. It is only a question of this whole mass of suffering. Internally or externally, it is just a case of suffering. What underlies it is craving. The cessation of craving itself is Nibbāna, and the path to it is the noble Eightfold Path. There is a wonderful discourse which describes that state of perfect stilling. There, Venerable Sariputta says, Ānanda, when the body is there due to bodily intention, there arises inward pleasure and pain. When speech is there due to verbal intention, there arises inward pleasure and pain. When mind is there due to mental intention, there arises inward pleasure and pain, all conditioned by ignorance. But he points out that with the remainderless cessation of ignorance, neither the body, nor the speech, nor the mind will be there. Avijjayatveva asesa viraga nirodha sokayo nahoti yang paccayas tang uppajjati ajhattang sukha dukkhang savacha nahoti yam paccayas tang uppajjati ajhattang sukha dukkhang so mano nahoti yam paccayas tang uppajjati ajhattang sukha dukkhang khettang tang nahoti vathung ta nahoti ayatanang tang nahoti adhikaranang tang nahoti yam paccayas tang uppajjati ajhattang sukha dukkhang. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance, that body is not there, owing to which there can arise for him inward pleasure and pain. That speech is not there, owing to which there can arise for him inward pleasure and pain. That mind is not there, owing to which there can arise for him inward pleasure and pain. That field is not there, that sight is not there, that base is not there, that reason is not there, owing to which there can arise for him inward pleasure and pain. Now, what does this mean? It is by taking this body as a unit, as my body, that all pleasure and pain arise. We do not understand it as a heap. We take the whole heap as a unit. We do not have an insightful understanding of it as a heap. By taking it as a unit, there is that experience of pleasure and pain. It is the same in the case of speech. Speech involves language. All depends on the meanings we attribute to a language. Supposing we go on scolding a person who doesn't know any language with a smile on our face. However much we scold him, he wouldn't know that he is being scolded. It is according to the meanings we infuse into some words we use that we experience pleasure and pain. So long as there is speech, in relation to the speech, we experience pleasure and pain. Isn't it the same with what we call the mind? A flux of thoughts that arise and cease we have grasped as a unit called the mind, with our personality view, sakkaya ditthi. There comes a time when even that mind ceases. It is as long as we have this mind that we suffer. So it seems this discourse has an extremely deep meaning. Here is a journey towards the cessation of existence. All the same, we should try to understand why the Buddha has declared that beings in samsara tend to drift towards two extremes, self-indulgence and self-mortification. There is the view of eternalism on one side, and the view of annihilationism on the other. If by taking dogmatically the idea that there is a self, one holds on to the view that suffering is of one's own making, sayankatang dukkhang, there is no possibility of deliverance. Due to that view of self, one will go on in samsara. If, on the contrary, one puts down suffering to fortuitous origin and forgets one's responsibility, one will get reborn in hell. The Buddha avoided both these extremes and proclaimed the Noble Eightfold Path as the middle path. While discussing the Noble Eightfold Path, we mentioned the right view that takes kamma as one's own, kammasakata sammaditthi, because it brings out a deep point. In ordinary life, worldlings are living with the two sections, oneself and others. Therefore, if one, through selfishness, acts under the influence of the three roots of evil, greed, hate, and delusion, one will end up in hell. Instead of it, the Buddha recommends a course of action which is conducive to one's own welfare, attahita, as well as to the other's welfare, parahita. Now, in the case of virtuous deeds, such as observing the moral precepts, we see that criterion of taking care of one's own and another's welfare. One may like to kill beings for food or for revenge. One may like to steal. But the Buddha disapproved of it, as it means harm to another. Thinking of the society at large, the Buddha has pointed out that what is skillful, kusala, in such contexts is whatever that is beneficial to both sides. The term kusala is often misunderstood and misinterpreted. The basic meaning is to be skillful. That skill, so long as one is in samsara, is in avoiding rebirth in miserable realms and in getting reborn in heavenly realms. But to be skillful in the highest sense of the term is to give up both merit and demerit, punya pa papa hina, and get beyond samsara for good. So then, the term kusala has a deeper dimension of meaning than punya, merit. Generally, both terms are used together in some contexts. For instance, in some discourses, we find the terms punya bhisanda and kusala bhisanda, streams of merit and streams of the skillful, used more or less like synonyms. However, out of the two terms, kusala is of greater influence and intrinsic worth than punya. It is directly connected with the mind. We started with the roots of the skillful and the unskillful. The roots of the unskillful are greed, hate, and delusion. The roots of the skillful are non-greed, non-hate, and non-delusion. But have you ever heard of roots of merit and demerit? Is there anything like that? There you are. Now you can understand the essential difference between punya and kusala. Kusala, or skillful, has a direct relation to the mind. The two words punya and pāpa have been used from ancient times to denote deeds with pleasant and unpleasant results. The 10 ways of making merit which you are familiar with, namely liberality, morality, meditation, dedication of merits, rejoicing in merits, rendering service, honoring, preaching, listening to Dhamma, and straightening of one's views, all these are reckoned as ways of making merit. But what is reckoned as skillful are the 10 skillful deeds, which apparently are negative in formulation for the most part. What is unskillful are killing, stealing, unchastity, lying, slandering, harsh speech, frivolous talk, avarice, ill will, and wrong views. What are called skillful are the abstention from killing, from stealing, from unchastity, from lying, from slandering, from harsh speech, from frivolous talk, non-avarice, non-ill will, and right view. In the case of unskillful, what is difficult is abstaining. But one has to be skillful in abstaining. The very distinction between the 10 meritorious deeds and the 10 skillful deeds shows the difference between punya and kusala. As we mentioned above, from the standpoint of the supramundane level, the highest kusala is to be skillful enough to transcend even the subtlest preparations that perpetuate existence. That is to say, not only merit and evil, but also in and out breathing, thinking and pondering, perception and feeling. The Buddha made known to the world a wonderful state of cessation of existence in the attainment to the fruit of arahanthood, in which all that is prepared, sankhata, even eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, are made to cease. In this age, many wrong views about kamma are rampant in the world. People are thinking of big things, but ignore kamma. In fact, it is the intellectual approach that is holding sway in the world. Because of this intellectualism, there is a neglect of such topics as kamma, which tendency will eventually pave the way to hell. Venerable Arahant Mahinda did not preach only the Chula Hattipadopama Sutta. He also preached the Devaduta Sutta to arouse fear about samsara in the minds of the people. Venerable Mahinda Thera described to our people the dreadful sufferings in hell, which the Buddha had seen with his divine eye, in order to acquaint them with the distinction between good and bad in conduct. In an age like this, you should make it a point to ponder over these things. Although this is the 10th sermon in our series of sermons on Paṭicca Samuppāda, we dealt with the topic of kamma because today happens to be the Poson Poya day. So on this hallowed day you had better take in whatever that is conducive to the future of the dispensation of the Buddha, as well as to your own Nibbāna out of this sermon. If by any chance you have any wrong views, if instead of the right view that takes kamma as one's own, you entertain some pervert or distorted view, you should do well to rectify them. Or else, if you have any doubts about the Four Noble Truths, which is basic to the Noble Eightfold Path, try your best to dispel them in the light of this sermon. We wish that this sermon will help you to understand the middle path preached by the Buddha and encourage you all to develop virtue, concentration, and wisdom. May that skillful kammic force enable you to attain deliverance from this dreadful samsara as soon as possible. Whatever beings there be from the lowest hell to the highest Brahma world, wishing to rejoice in this sermon, may they all rejoice in our sermon. May the merits accrued thereby conduce to the fulfillment of their highest aim, the deathless Nibbāna. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.